Just before dawn on December 6, 1928, in the town square of Ciénaga on Colombia's Caribbean coast, thousands of banana workers stood waiting. They had been on strike for weeks. Around them, on the rooftops and at the edges of the plaza, roughly 700 soldiers of the Colombian army took position, rifles loaded. The workers wanted almost nothing: a written contract, a 6-day week, to be paid in actual money instead of paper vouchers they could only spend at the company store. For asking, they were given 5 minutes to clear the square. Then the soldiers fired into the crowd. The government would later record 47 dead. Survivors, historians, and the novelist who grew up nearby put the number in the hundreds, some said as high as 2,000. The bodies, witnesses claimed, were loaded onto trains in the dark, the same trains that hauled the fruit, and dumped into the sea so they could never be counted. To this day, nobody knows the real number, because the only people in a position to count were the ones holding the rifles. At the center of it, a fruit so cheap it's nearly free. The men in that plaza grew the most popular fruit on earth and were shot for asking to be paid in coins. And the strangest part of the whole story is that this fruit shouldn't really exist at all because the banana in your kitchen can't make seeds. That was 1928. But to understand why anyone would kill over a banana, you have to start with what a banana actually is. Slice open a banana and look at the tiny black specks down the middle. Those are the ghosts of seeds the fruit's ancestors were full of hard, inedible ones. The banana you eat is a sterile mutant. It cannot reproduce on its own. Every single Cavendish banana on Earth is a clone grown from a cutting of another banana plant, which was a cutting of another, going back and back a fruit that has effectively been one continuous organism for decades. That means every banana of a given type is genetically identical, not similar. Identical, the same organism copied 1 trillion times. A wild banana, the kind that still grows in Southeast Asia, is a tough, stubby thing packed with rock-hard seeds, barely worth eating. Thousands of years ago, humans found rare seedless mutants and kept replanting cuttings of them. Because a banana with no seeds is a banana you can actually eat. Convenience, propagated forever. But a crop that can't have sex can't evolve. It can't breed new defenses. It is frozen, permanently, at whatever strengths and weaknesses it had the day it was cloned. What kills one can kill all of them. Hold on to that fact, the entire bloody story bends around it. For most of the 20th century, the world didn't even eat the banana you know now. It ate a variety called Gros Michel Big Mike. Bigger, tougher skinned, and by legend far sweeter, though some food historians warn that memory has been polished by nostalgia. What's certain is that Big Mike shipped well, and shipping was everything. A fruit that rots in days had to be moved from a tropical field to a New York grocery before it turned to mush. Solving that problem, turning a fragile tropical plant into the cheapest fruit in the world, took railroads, steamships, refrigeration, and enormous amounts of land. And one man looked at that challenge and saw an empire. His name was Minor C. Keith, an American who went to Central America in the 1870s to build a railroad in Costa Rica. The railroad nearly ruined him. The terrain was murderous. Thousands of workers died laying track through jungle and swamp, and by grim local legend, the first stretch of the line cost roughly 1 dead man for every railroad tie. Keith needed something to fill the freight cars and pay the debt, so he planted bananas along the route and shipped them north. The bananas made more money than the railroad ever would. The train that was supposed to be the business became merely the delivery system for the fruit. In 1899, Keith's operation merged with a Boston company to form the United Fruit Company. Within a couple of decades, it was one of the most powerful corporations on the planet, owner of millions of acres, hundreds of miles of railroad, entire ports, and a private shipping fleet so large it was called the Great White Fleet. In some Central American countries, United Fruit was the largest landowner, the largest employer, and the real power behind the government all at once. People across Latin America had a name for it. They called it El Pulpo, the Octopus, because its arms reached into everything: the land, the railways, the harbors, the newspapers, the presidential palace, In 1904, an American writer hiding in Honduras to dodge an embezzlement charge, you know him as O. Henry published a book of stories set in a fictional country he called a banana republic. He meant a small nation whose entire economy, and therefore whose entire politics, was owned by a single foreign fruit company. It wasn't an insult, it was a description. And the whole model had one non-negotiable rule: the fruit had to stay cheap. Think about how strange the banana's price is. It grows only in the tropics. It bruises if you look at it wrong. It has to be cut green, shipped thousands of miles in refrigerated holds, and ripened on arrival, and it still lands in your supermarket cheaper, per pound, than apples grown down the road. That impossibly low price is not natural. It was engineered, and someone always paid for it. The someone was the plantation worker. United Fruit built entire company towns, housing, stores, clinics, all owned by the company. Workers were often paid not in national currency, but in company scrip, vouchers that were worthless anywhere except the company store, where the company set the prices. You worked for the company, lived in the company's house, and spent the company's money buying the company's goods. The wage went out one door and came back in another. There was a colder logic underneath it, too. If your wages only work at one store, you can never save enough to leave. Never build the cushion that lets a worker say no. The scrip wasn't just cheaper for the company, it was a leash. It kept the labor that grew the cheapest fruit on earth permanently in place and permanently in debt. Cheapness at the supermarket and captivity on the plantation were the same policy viewed from two ends. By the 1920s, the banana workers of Colombia's Magdalena region had done the math on that arrangement. And in November 1928, at least 25,000 of them stopped working, the largest labor action the country had ever seen. Their written demands read like a list of the bare minimum. Formal written contracts instead of being hired through labor contractors the company could disown. A 6-day work week. Payment in real money, not scrip. Clean dormitories. Compensation if you were hurt on the job. Hospitals that actually treated them. United Fruit refused to even negotiate. Instead, the company leaned on Washington, and Washington, according to the accounts, warned Colombia that U.S. Marines might land to protect American property if the strike wasn't crushed. Faced with the threat of an American invasion over bananas, the Colombian government chose to crush its own citizens. It declared the strikers a violent mob and sent General Carlos Cortes Vargas with roughly 700 troops. What happened in the Ciénaga Plaza on December 6th is the scene from the cold open. Soldiers gave the crowd minutes to disperse, then opened fire. How many died is still argued a century later, precisely because the people who did the counting were the people who did the shooting, the official 47, against survivor estimates ranging into the thousands. Decades later, a boy who grew up in that region turned the massacre into one of the most famous scenes in world literature. In 100 Years of Solitude, Gabriel García Márquez described thousands of bodies loaded onto a 200-car train and carried to the sea, and then a town that wakes up and denies it ever happened. He wrote it as fiction because the fiction preserved a truth the records had erased. That is how most people on Earth remember the Banana Massacre, through a novel. The company survived the strike without conceding much of anything. But it was about to meet an enemy it could not intimidate, arrest, or shoot. The enemy was in the soil. It's called Panama disease, a fungus, a fusarium, that lives in the dirt, enters the banana plant through its roots, and chokes it from the inside until it wilts and dies. There's no cure. You can't spray it away. And once it's in the soil, it stays there for decades, waiting. Through the first half of the 20th century, this fungus began doing to Gros Michel what no strike ever could. Whole plantations browned and collapsed. United Fruit's answer was brutally simple. When the land got sick, abandon it and clear virgin jungle to plant somewhere clean. The disease didn't just kill bananas. It drove deforestation across Central America as the industry fled its own contamination, always one step ahead of the rot. But a clone can only run so far. Because every Gros Michel was genetically identical, the fungus that killed one killed all of them. By around 1965, Big Mike was finished as a global crop the banana the world had eaten for generations went, commercially, extinct. Remember that fact about seeds and clones from the beginning? This is the bill coming due for the first time. The industry needed a replacement, fast a banana that happened to resist Panama disease. They found one growing, of all places, in the greenhouse of an English estate, a variety a Duke's gardener had cultivated back in the 1830s, named after the Duke's family, the Cavendish. It was smaller, blander, and so delicate it bruised in transit where Big Mike had shrugged off rough handling. Nobody chose it because it was better. They chose it because it lived. To make it work, the whole trade had to be rebuilt around the new fruit's weaknesses boxed, instead of shipped on the stem, ripened in special rooms with ethylene gas, handled like eggs at every step. Billions of dollars of infrastructure were rewired to prop up a banana chosen for one reason only. It survived the last plague. And in switching, the industry made the exact same bet all over again, the entire planet's banana supply, staked on a single genetically identical clone. They had just watched uniformity kill Gros Michel. They rebuilt uniformity anyway. While the banana itself was dying in the ground, United Fruit was fighting a different war above it over the land itself. In 1951, Guatemala elected a reformer named Jacobo Arbenz. His country was one of the classic banana republics. United Fruit was the largest landowner, and it kept most of that land deliberately uncultivated, a reserve held out of use. In 1952, Arbenz passed Decree 900, a land reform that took uncultivated land from large owners and gave it to landless peasants. Crucially, the government offered compensation based on the value United Fruit itself had declared for the land on its tax filings, a value the company had kept artificially low for years to dodge taxes. Now that low number was used to pay them, and they were furious. United Fruit did what El Pulpo always did. It reached into Washington, and Washington's arms were unusually close to the company. Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA, and his brother John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State, both had ties to United Fruit. The company launched a campaign to reframe a land reform as a communist takeover in America's backyard and at the height of the Cold War. That framing worked. The CIA ran an operation called PB Success, a propaganda blitz, a fake rebel radio station, and a small U.S.-backed invasion force. On June 27, 1954, Arbenz resigned. A military government took his place. The expropriated land went straight back to United Fruit, the unions were dissolved, and Guatemala fell into decades of dictatorship and a civil war that would kill some 200,000 people. A fruit company had helped overthrow a democracy to protect land it wasn't even using. The land went back. The killing didn't stop. And the company would keep the pattern going long after it changed its name. United Fruit didn't stay United Fruit. In the 1970s, it merged and became United Brands, and in 1975, it produced one final piece of theater from the old era. That year, its chairman, Eli Black, broke a window of his office on the 44th floor of the Pan Am building in New York and jumped. Investigators soon uncovered why. The company had bribed a Honduran official to lower banana export taxes. The scandal was nicknamed Bananagate. The Octopus had been caught buying a government retail, one minister at a time. The company rebranded again into the friendly name on the little blue sticker. Chiquita, a cartoon banana in a fruit hat, singing a jingle about how to store your fruit. It was one of the great image makeovers in corporate history. The octopus turned into a smiling mascot. But the pattern didn't retire with the old logo. In 2007, Chiquita pleaded guilty in a U.S. federal court to paying about $1.7 million over several years to a Colombian paramilitary group, a designated terrorist organization responsible for massacres of its own in exchange for protection of its banana operations. The company was fined $25 million, and years of litigation followed from families of the paramilitary's victims. Nearly 80 years after Ciénaga, In the same country, the arithmetic of the banana was unchanged. Whatever it costs to keep the fruit flowing and cheap, someone in a plantation region pays it, and rarely the people eating the fruit. And all the while, quietly, in the soil of the plantations. The bet the industry made back in 1965 was starting to come apart. The Cavendish, the clone chosen because it resisted the last plague, had met a new one. It's called Tropical Race 4. TR4, it is Panama disease, evolved a new strain of the same soil fungus, and this one kills the Cavendish that the old one couldn't touch. The banana that was chosen specifically because it survived the last plague has no answer at all to this one. Same story, same weakness, same clone with no genetic escape hatch. Because a Cavendish in Ecuador is genetically identical to a Cavendish in the Philippines and to the one in your kitchen. There is no backup variety being grown at scale, no Plan B ripening in the world's plantations. The industry spent 60 years perfecting the delivery of one fruit and never seriously diversified away from it. TR4 first tore through banana crops in Asia and Australia. It spread to the Middle East, then Africa. Quarantines were thrown up, boots were disinfected, whole farms were sealed off, and none of it held. Because the fungus travels invisibly in a smear of dirt on a tool, a boot, a tire, and survives in soil for 30 years or more. In 2019, it was confirmed in Colombia, inside Latin America, the heartland of the export banana. The same coastal world where the 1928 strike had happened. The fungus that ended Gros Michel is now hunting its replacement, and because more than 95% of the bananas in world trade are the one identical Cavendish clone, they are all equally defenseless. A disease that would be a manageable nuisance in a genetically diverse crop is an extinction event in a monoculture. The industry looked at the death of Big Mike, learned nothing, and rebuilt the exact same trap. There is no spray that stops it. Once TR4 is in a field soil, that field is finished for bananas for decades. Which leaves the industry with only one real hope: not to fight the fungus in the dirt, but to change the banana itself. That fight is happening right now, and the latest chapter is only months old. In February 2026, researchers at the University of Queensland, building on years of work by the team of scientist James Dale, announced they had pinned down the genetic source of resistance. They traced it to a specific region on chromosome 5 in a wild, inedible banana called Calcutta 4, a plant full of exactly the hard seeds our sterile Cavendish threw away. And a genetically modified Cavendish carrying a wild resistance gene came through a multi-year field trial essentially 100% resistant to TR4. Sit with the irony of that. For a century, the industry prized the banana precisely because it had no seeds, no variation, no wildness, a perfect, uniform, controllable clone. And that uniformity is exactly what is killing it. The only thing that can save the modern banana is to borrow back the wild genes it spent 100 years engineering out. There are catches. Much of the world is wary of genetically modified food, and a GM banana would have to win over shoppers who have spent decades being told to fear exactly that. Rival teams are chasing a non-GM path, instead conventional breeding, gene editing, hunting resistance in the hundreds of wild and traditional banana varieties most of us have never seen. The diversity the export trade threw away. And all of it is a race against a fungus already loose on 4 continents and impossible to recall from the soil it's in. Whether the world accepts a genetically modified banana and whether the fix arrives before TR4 does is the open question the entire trade now hangs on. The cheapest fruit on earth is, once again, one clone away from disaster, and this time there may be no spare clone waiting in an English greenhouse to bail it out. Tomorrow the banana in your kitchen will cost you almost nothing, likely less, pound for pound, than fruit grown in your own country. Hold it and remember what that price is made of. A sterile clone that can't reproduce. A company that owned entire nations and was called the Octopus. A plaza full of workers shot for asking to be paid in money. A democracy overthrown to protect unused land. And a fungus, twice now, calling in the debt of a fruit that refused to change. The banana conquered the world by being identical everywhere, the same clone, the same price, the same cheapness on every shelf on Earth. And that sameness is exactly why it keeps dying, and why people kept dying to keep it cheap. That's the bitter yield.